thank you for coming. What I'm going to present today relates to one area of my research work, which is looking at the teaching and learning of English language learners in the content areas. And as you know, I'm Luciana de Oliveira. I'm an associate professor in literacy and language education. But more importantly, I would say, my focus is on English language learners. So that's something that I really care about. So the topic of the presentation is what's the problem? The language demands of mathematical word problems for English language learners. And so just to kind of give you a little bit more background about my research really focuses on three main areas or strands. The first one is the teaching and learning of ELLs in the content areas, looking at English language arts, history and the social studies, math and science. The second strand is on teacher education for ELLs, advocacy and social justice. And the third one focuses on non-native English-speaking teachers, or teachers who are English language learners themselves. A couple of things that are going on right now. My first book, Knowing and Writing School History, just came out last year. And it's basically based on my dissertation. I just got the page proofs for my second book. It's an edited volume, Teacher Education for Social Justice, Perspectives and Lessons Learned. This is actually based on a course that I taught in the spring of 2011. I got a diversity fellowship through the Office of Diversity, and I developed a course focused on teacher education for social justice because we really do not have a lot of emphasis on teacher education research in the college, and we didn't have a course that focused on teacher education research more generally, and then specifically what it means to teach for social justice and preparing teachers to teach for social justice. So this book is a compilation of the students' papers from the class. So at the end of the semester, instead of just turning in papers, they actually turned in chapters for the book. So I'm very excited about that. And the third one is focused on L2 writing in secondary classrooms. Just submitted that over the summer. I co-edited that book with Tony Silva, a colleague from the ESL department in the Department of English, and that's going to be hopefully in print out by the TESOL convention next year. So anyway, that's what's going on in my life right now. And specifically, I want to focus again on word problems in mathematics and why they're challenging for English language learners. They present significant comprehension difficulties because they're particularly challenging for English language learners. The comprehension challenges have to do with lexical complexity, for example, the vocabulary that's used in the word problems, but also sentence complexity, so how the word problems are constructed linguistically, let's put it that way. And they are present in many mathematics textbooks and also in standardized tests. And I had a couple of projects focused on analyzing the challenges of mathematics textbooks and also analyzing the challenges of standardized tests. And this is basically primarily focused on those two projects. There are also important measures of mathematical understanding. You see that a lot of word problems, again, are present in textbooks and tests, and so those are ways that English language learners have to demonstrate their understanding by actually doing the word problems. So this is a framework for analyzing word problems at the elementary level that I've developed, looking at 5 questions to help teachers identify the language demands. So this is primarily based on my linguistic work. So I do a lot of work out in the schools, but when I'm not out in the schools, I do a lot of work on discourse analysis. And so that's basically what this focuses on. Designed to guide teachers to analyze a word problem before they present it to students. And one of the reasons why I wanted to develop this framework was really related to my workshops for teachers. I do a lot of workshops for teachers in schools, and I do a lot of work with teachers in the schools. And one of the main things that they tell me is word problems cause a lot of difficulty for English language learners. So is there a way for us to look at word problems and kind of predict some of the challenges that students would face? And that's why this came about. I should have mentioned that before, but there you go. So looking specifically then, or helping teachers look at the structure of the word problems and the language demands for ELLs. And each guiding question, then teachers can have a simultaneous focus on the mathematical concepts integrated in the word problem, but also focus on aspects of language with which ELLs may have difficulty. Okay, so there's a dual focus here on the guiding questions, and I'll show you the example. So this, it actually has 5 questions, so it didn't fit all in one slide, so there are 2 slides for that. So look at each guiding question. We have what task is the student asked to perform? The language demands to identify would be the type of questions and their structure. For example, is the question using how many, how much, those sorts of things. And the task for teachers then would be to analyze the question by identifying what it is that it's asking. So looking first at the question, even before you look at sort of the context for the particular question. What relevant information is presented in the word problem. So looking at the overall clause construction, so looking at the verbs, for example. So of course I give a lot of examples for the math teachers to really be able to identify the verbs, and who is being presented in the word problem, what is being presented, and is something being done to somebody else, that type of thing. And so what the teachers can do is to break down the clause by finding what information is being presented. So what information is actually in the word problem. Then number 3, which mathematical concepts are presented in the information? So it's not just, okay, we have this information, but specifically, what are the mathematical concepts that are being presented? Then we look at numerical information, for example, that can be presented either by looking at numbers or words. And the idea here then for the task is to connect the mathematical concepts needed by looking at the specific numerical information presented in the clause. And I'll give you examples, so it will make more sense once I give you the examples. What mathematical representations and procedures can students use to solve the problem based on the information presented and the mathematical concepts identified? So for here, we'll look at the overall question that is being asked plus specific clause structures, and I'll explain again what those are. To connect, so the task is to connect all previously analyzed pieces to determine a variety of mathematical representations and procedures that can be used to solve the problem. Okay? And then number 5, what additional language demands exist in this problem? So we're looking specifically at language chunks that we were not able to identify before, not as isolated items, and we connect them to different parts of the problem. And so, of course, you know, that is the task is to identify any aspect of language that seems problematic for ELLs that was not recognized before. So just some examples. So one example that I included here is from an I-STEP item sampler that was provided online in the 3rd grade level. And it's part of some examples of the types of problems that are typically found on the I-STEP. And the 5 key academic standards covered for grade 2 to be assessed in grade 3 are number sense, computation, algebra and functions, geometry, measurement, and problem solving. And this one was part of the problem solving section of the test. And so there you go. This is the word problem. Denise is buying candy for 3 of her friends. She wants to give each friend 4 pieces of candy. If each piece of candy costs 5 cents, how much money will Denise spend on candy for her friends? So I'm going to give you a task, because I do a lot of workshops for teachers. You know, I kind of like to engage with the audience. I have the guiding questions, so I'll give you a couple of minutes. I have 10 copies, so you may have to share. Here you go. See if you can do this yourself. So I'll just give you a couple minutes, because I do have all the analysis here.
There's one right answer.
Yes, sure. Always. Always. We're in education. There's always one. There are multiple ways of doing it.
And how they're graded too, or how they're assessed.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And of course, before, students would just have to, it was multiple choice, right? But with the Common Core standards, a lot of what they have to do is actually to show how they reach a particular answer. So, you know, language will be a major part of now the Common Core if you think about the changes. So, specifically in math, or in language arts as well. So anyway, okay, we're ready to. I'll just show you, and you can tell me a little bit more about what you've done. So, first thing that I did was divide these into clauses, and of course when I'm working with teachers using this framework, you know, I spent quite a bit of time kind of explaining what we mean by this, and if they don't quite get it right, it's no problem, because what we're really interested in is identifying some of the challenges so they can help their English learners. So some of the language demands then, if you think of the first question that you have there, what task is the student asked to perform? So the first thing you're going to do is to look at the word problem and find the question mark, right? Yes. Sometimes you're not going to have a question mark because you're going to have a verb, like find the answer to blah, blah, blah. So I explained that when I actually wrote about this, but you know, most of the time you're going to find a question mark. And so we're going to look closely at what the question asks students to do. And here in this particular word problem, we have an if clause that is very, very, very common in mathematics. So there's always this sort of condition, which is really not really a condition. So if each piece of candy costs 5 cents, so you have that, you have the symbol, right, that of course students would need to recognize. You also have the construction spend on candy, okay, which is a little bit different than what in everyday language you would find in terms of the preposition on, which would be mostly, you know, the water bottle is on the table. That's typically what we see, but this is used in math, okay, spend on candy. So that would likely be an issue. We also have human participants being introduced here. We have Denise as the human participant being introduced. So the one who will be spending the money. And we also have for her friends. So sort of this category. We don't have the names of her friends or anything, but we know then that it's Denise's 3 friends based on that. What relevant information is presented in the word problem? So we can analyze different aspects of the text, what is being presented in terms of the problem itself. So if you look here, we can divide it up into the different clauses and analyze who or what is being presented and so on. So Denise is buying candy for 3 of her friends. So who, we have Denise, what is she doing? She's buying, what is she buying, and for whom? And then she wants to give each friend 4 pieces of candy. Who again is she, and she refers back to Denise. What does she want? She wants to give something. To whom? Each friend. And what? It's 4 pieces of candy. And so if each piece of candy costs 5 cents, we have a what? Each piece of candy. How much is each piece of candy? We have 5 cents. And some more information here. Which mathematical concepts are presented in the information? So for this word problem, we know that the question reveals it's asking something about a quantity. So how much money? And so this table helps then to connect the information that we have with the mathematical concepts that are presented in the problem. Okay, and for us good readers, it may be, well, this is very simple to think about, right? But think about an English learner reading this word problem in a testing situation, and the kinds of connections between language and the math that they have to be able to show and to do. So Denise is buying candy for 3 of her friends. So we have the total number of friends, which they have to connect with the number 3. She wants to give each friend 4 pieces of candy. So the number, we have then the number of pieces of candy, the total, right? 4. We have each friend, but if I don't know the word each, I'm in trouble because then I need to connect each friend with the number 1, correct? Then, therefore, there would be 4 pieces of candy for 1 friend. If each piece of candy costs 5 cents, so now we have the number 1 again here for the word each piece of candy equals 5 cents. So is that kind of making sense? Okay. What mathematical representations and procedures can be used to solve the problem based on the information presented and the mathematical concepts identified? So now it's where we're going to connect everything that we've looked at before. So the table then will help teachers draw on the crucial mathematical language and ideas that are inherent in the construction of the word problem to plan lessons that will enhance ELL's access to the problem. So the idea here is, okay, how can I represent this visually for my English language learners who are having trouble accessing this language? Okay, so the idea, of course, when I talk to teachers about this framework and how to do this type of analysis, they often ask me, well, but I have 50 word problems in my textbook, so do I have to do this with every single one of them? And what I tell them, well, you can actually present something like this to your students. It's one way of presenting, but you're going to select 1 or 2 to do on the board, for example, with all of the class, okay? Or you can help your students your English language learners at a separate table or something to have access to the language, okay? So this is something that I wanted to bring up before I forgot. So anyway, we have the information provided, then we have the mathematical concepts and the mathematical representations and procedures. Okay, so there are different ways of representing, of course, you know, a friend or the piece of candy and so on. But this was one way that I found would be helpful. And the same here, each piece of candy, the price, and then you have all of the beautiful math up there, and the clause 3 representation over here. And again, to us, it may seem kind of simple, but for an ELL, having this process is very important. Any additional language demands in the word problems? So if we look at different language chunks, we can then connect the language chunks to the rest of the word problem. And so, for example, there are a lot of reference devices, which are words that stand for other words in the text. So for the human participant, Denise, we have the word she. For the noun group 3 of her friends, in clause 1, participants are picked up in clause 2, for example, each friend. So now it's not the 3 friends anymore, it's each friend. So again, related each, meaning one, and then again in clause 4, her friends, meaning the niece's friends. So, okay, so anyway, I hope that made sense. Why use this with teachers, in particular who have English language learners in their classes? I'm hoping that it will help teachers analyze the construction of word problems, make content more accessible for ELLs by providing them access to the ways in which knowledge is constructed in mathematics word problems. I often get asked the question, well, why don't I just simplify it for them or do it for them, you know, in some way? And I say, well, you're not really providing them access to the language that they're going to need to pass that standardized exam or to do the word problems later on in their future. So they need to, this idea of accessible is actually very common in my field, in the field of teaching English to speakers of other languages. And so the idea here is that, again, we're giving them access to the ways that language is used. Not to simplify the word problems, but to enhance teachers' understandings about how mathematical disciplinary discourse is constructed in them. And of course, this was at the elementary level. At the high school level, the problems become a lot more complex. And I have another example here, but I'm not going to go over that. So the idea of a language-based mathematics instruction here refers to a simultaneous focus on both math discourse and math content. And math discourse is defined as communication that centers on meaning-making of mathematical concepts. It's more than just knowing vocabulary. So for example, in that particular word problem, if I knew the word candy or is buying wouldn't just help me if I just pre-taught those words to my English learners, okay? We really needed to understand the context of the entire problem and how the words were being used to express the math concepts. So it's negotiating meanings by listening to and responding to, describing understanding, making conjectures, presenting solutions, challenging the thinking of others, and connecting mathematical notations and representations. Mathematics discourse is then the basis for this language-based mathematics instruction. And again, content area instruction has been a major, or is a major context for building language and literacy in the education of ELLs. But we need to really fully understand the demands of mathematical discourse for ELLs and consider the language demands of mathematics, especially at the elementary school level. And so we have then a simultaneous focus on both content and language. And I actually presented this at NCTM, the National Council of Teachers of Math Conference, this past April. And I had about probably 40 teachers in the audience, and we kind of worked through some word problems, and they found it, of course, a little challenging in terms of working with the language, but they appreciated just the time to really focus on language. They felt that a lot of times, most of them I would say, that they think about how they're presenting the content, but not necessarily have the time to think about how English learners would understand that content. So So ELLs need to be able to engage with the meanings presented in word problems, but again, like I mentioned before, discourse structure is seldom attended to in math classrooms, but content is never separate from the language through which that content is manifested. And the language demands highlight the kinds of discipline-specific academic support in language and literacy development for math learning that ELLs really need. So I hope that this description then and the framework can help elementary teachers be more proactive in helping ELLs learn the ways language is used to construct mathematical knowledge, better understand the language demands and address them in their curriculum, specifically because of the issue of accessibility. And I mentioned that over and over again whenever I'm presenting, because again, that has been a major topic in my field. So one of the major goals, but making texts more accessible means more than simplifying the language. They need access to math discourse. And for me, this is a matter of social justice. If ELLs are not given opportunities to engage and participate in experiences involving the use of appropriate math discourse, they will continue to be at a disadvantage. So that is my presentation. I think I did okay on time, right?
You did.
Okay, thank you very much. And just some more references there. And the second one, that's, so this framework was published in this book over here. It's called Beyond Good Teaching, Advancing Mathematics Education for ELLs. And it's the first book published by the National Council of Teachers of Math that focuses on English language learners. So it's a very nice resource. Of course, I don't think many of you are in math, but my math colleagues know about this. So anyway, I wanted to show that it's in here. Okay? So do we take questions?
Yes,
or
we have time. We have time
go
for
back
questions.
To the audience. Yes.
Lou, can you give me an example of maybe a research study that you may have conducted or are in the process of conducting relating to the usage or implementation of this framework?
Mm-hmm. So my plan is next year to be in a classroom and help to, so after I present, actually, let me go back. I have a course buyout this semester to work with the Wabash Valley Education Center, and I will be doing workshops for teachers, and one of the things that I'm going to be presenting to them is this framework. And so I'm hoping that some of the teachers, maybe one or two teachers, would be able to have me in their class next year so that they would be able to use this and implement this in terms of finding the challenges themselves, but then presenting the word problem to the students. And then from there, consider how it's actually working. So. And then I have another study done in science where I found some of the challenges for English language learners in science texts and developed lessons with a teacher, a fourth grade teacher, and she actually implemented the lessons in the classroom. I collected data, and we actually, we have several publications related to that work. So it's not just in math, but I've also done work in science as well. So it's a little bit more extensive than what this is. Yes?
Maybe this is just because of the limited time you have, but you're talking about ELLs in a very global kind of a way.
Yes.
So in your field, are people looking at different languages, different families of languages that students bring to the classroom, and how that might contribute to the kinds of challenges that they face?
Yes, absolutely. Most of the teachers that I've worked with, they have Spanish speakers in their classes, but I've also worked with teachers who have, in a school, they have 44 different languages represented. So definitely that's one area. I particularly like to focus on what the language of English, so the English language, what challenges the English language would present for ELLs in general, But of course, there are differences in terms of levels of language proficiency. So of course, this is not something that perhaps you would do with a level 1 English language learner who is just really learning how to respond yes/no questions and pointing. And so this is more for students who are at levels 3 and 4 of English language proficiency. So they're at the intermediate levels and struggling and not passing the I-step and that. So those are the students that are really the focus here.
I'm also thinking, though, that different languages, each language has its own logic.
Yes.
It has its own structure, grammar, all the rules that go along with that. And I could imagine that Spanish speakers would have one set of challenges trying to make the transition from Spanish language to English language. But someone coming from an African country,
yes,
a Bantu language that has a very different logic and structure to it, would have very different kinds of challenges as they're trying to make that similar transition compared to their Spanish-speaking student friends who are right next door.
Exactly.
So how does a teacher try to work with those different challenges?
It is very challenging. Yeah, when when the teachers who are part of the licensure program that I direct, they talk about the challenges that they face, and they all have the same language background in the classroom. That is exactly what I talk about in terms of, okay, so you have to think about, if you move to another district, you may have 5 or 6 different languages within the classroom, and how do you predict some of the challenges? And so we talk a little bit about the construction of different families of language that would present different challenges. Absolutely. Yeah.
Other questions for Luke? We've got time for discussion with both of our presenters. So if you'd like to grab a cookie and just talk.
I have a question for both presenters. So I'm trying to combine the two presentations that you've done here. And I honestly don't know. I am a participating SLED faculty member on one of the design teams here, but I've never thought about the issue of language thanks to Lou's presentation. How about in our SLED design teams, we've never even brought up this issue of language. It wasn't a challenge that might present from the design tasks that we're developing for the students. So have you collaborated? If you haven't, will you or can you, or is there a way that we need to become more sensitized to some of the issues that Lou is presenting in the work that we're doing with SLED?
It's not that it's not important, because that is a critically important area. I think what we're trying hard is to remain true to the original goals and objectives. And having NSF recently visit us, we've been given a new charge and a new series of objectives, so I think we're trying to hold true to what we propose. And it's not to say that there's not that opportunity. I think is there some way that could help support those goals and those intentions? There's other aspects also about the mathematics, because we focus on the science, but what about the construction of new knowledge with regards to math? So in addition to this respective audience, we also have another competing layer. And on top of that is literacy, because at the grade, and what I mean by literacy, I'm thinking of the Common Core relative to what the language arts teachers are now having to meet. That is something that they're being held accountable for, so how do we weave that in as well? So there's all these competing forces, and it's not to say that they're not important. At the same time, we have to make sure the STEM faculty, who are content experts, just understand the fundamentals of what a grade 3 child could learn or a grade 4 child could learn, and we're learning that that's even complicated. Yeah. So I don't have those other factors influence yet until we can get the design teams on board with what's going on.
And I think it also relates to the student population that you have. You may not have a lot of English language learners in your project, but
they're there. They are there. Yeah, they're there more than we anticipated, but it's not to the percentage that you may see in more concentrated areas such as Attica or other school corporations, or Frankfurt. But it's not that they're not there. They're there in Lafayette School Corporation, absolutely. It's just one of those layers we haven't peeled apart because we're still working on the core principles.
And we do take it into some consideration, not in the formal context that was just shown, but we do take into consideration of, well, what sort of vocabulary does a 3rd, 4th, or 6th grade student So we encountered that in one of our activities is we walked in and said, okay, well, design a sensor, and they all turned and the entire class looked at us like,
oh, a device.
Yeah, a device, yeah.
We asked them, we used the word device, could you create a device? And they all went.
And they all just looked at us with a blank stare, and it's like, okay, how can we readjust?
And so even the word constraints, we worked with, when we first started piloting this, we were in a 4th grade classroom and the word constraints came up and one of the children raised their hand, well, what's a constraint? Oh, okay, let's stop. And we took about 20 minutes out of the classroom lesson to say, what do you think it sounds like? And it was really quite cute because, and we learned so much from it. The children said, well, those are the rules you have to follow. And in a way, they are correct. So we're trying to use their words at the same time. And so when we work with the teachers, we use the children's words at the same time.
Well, and I was going to say, the teachers who are members of the SLED design teams are extremely valuable for a number of reasons, but this is kind of the reality check on the level of language that we can be incorporating into these design tasks. We'll talk the technical language, we who are content experts, and we tend to forget that the 3rd grader is never going to understand that.
Exactly. We talk about it as building bridges between everyday and academic language. So, you have the everyday language that the students are going to be more familiar with, and then the academic language that you're using. So constraints is a great example of that. And there are science-specific words and math-specific words. And if you use the word table, for example, it's going to mean something different in different content areas. So we talk a lot about that in the class I'm teaching actually this semester, but also in workshops and the work that I do. And I was going to mention something else.
There is curriculum that's available that provides a more, you use accessible, we might say inclusive, and one of the curriculum that's out there is Engineering's Elementary, which is published through the Museum of Science in Boston. And what they do is they set the context of the problem within a real-world story that's couched somewhere in the world. So sometimes a story could be placed in Africa. Sometimes the story could be in Israel. And so it places the context in a culturally rich area so that it exposes the child to that. However, it seems so fake that, and prescripted and prescribed that I don't think that's the way to approach that. I think it's looking at existing English language because that's what the children are exposed to day in and day out, and really unpacking that and working with the teachers through that. And then maybe the teachers can create a more authentic context using the cultures that are there in the classroom. Ask the children that versus exposing them to Hafid's dilemma with bringing a plant to the wedding in Israel. And it's like, how many children go to a wedding with a hibiscus or an amaryllis plant and have to put it in a package to bring it to Israel? It just doesn't seem very tangible for them.
I agree. I agree with exactly what you're saying. Sometimes they just, a lot of just picture books or whatever, they try to include more culturally inclusive names and so on, and it just...
That's not the way you reach those children. You have to ask the children to bring their culture to the classroom and position that as important, I think. So, to answer your question, as well. No, not yet.
But I actually was doing a language analysis of the task that you presented. When you presented, it was very interesting.
We're trying to work with the faculty just to create those briefs so that we can understand them. And then we then think, how do grade 3 children understand them? And there's a lot of modification and revision, so we always know it's a work in progress.
And in thinking about tasks and the examples that you use in the classroom, I have a student now, a PhD candidate, who is doing research in the classroom, and the teacher was using the example, to teach procedure, how do you make cereal in the morning? And this English language learner had no idea she couldn't figure out what preparing cereal in the morning was, because even though, so the task was, you have to describe the procedure and the kid has to tell you what you were doing, basically kind of guessing what you're doing based on experience. But this ELL had never had an experience of making cereal. So even some things that you think are everyday for kids may not be everyday for your English learner, who has different cultural experiences. So that is something really interesting that we're finding as well.
Other questions, Rebecca?
I'm not sure whether this is going to be a good question or not, but I was just curious because I saw one second grade student who was an ELL who had a hard time communicating in classroom, but was really good at math. So when he had a math problem, he was right on, you know. So I was wondering if we can see math word problem as a something as a means to enhance their language learning. Although there are some challenges,
yes,
context, but using them as a means.
They can do the problem. They can do the computation, but they may not understand everything that is in the word problem. So I talk a lot about collaboration between ESL teachers and math teachers. So I saw a lot of that in California. Not so much so far here in Indiana, but in California there are different models for ESL teachers to collaborate with math or science or in all content areas, and really like a push-in model when the ESL teacher comes into the classroom and works with the kids. And so I could really see the more work on language in math classrooms through that type of collaboration.
I had one question for SLED project too. How you have so many partners? How did you put the team together? And if you could tell us a little bit about the grant writing process, that would be really.
So how do you put the team together?
Well, it was starting a long time in advance. That was
It was
part
about
of it.
5 years ago where the seed of the idea was generated during
Thank you. Yes, goodbye, Mike.
Yes.
In a 5th grade classroom. And the teacher and I looked and said, this could be a dream come true if we could look at what children are learning through this design process, because what we saw was this principle of busy, happy, good. The kids were busy, and the teacher was busy, and she was happy, and they were happy, and that was all good. But we realized, what are they actually learning if we asked them something about a science phenomenon? So when putting it together, I had talked to Jim and talked to him about this idea, and he mentioned Dr. Todd Kelly, who was a new faculty member who was an affiliated hire through the Inspire program and with the College of Technology. And I knew Johannes was doing work with design and science education, so I had met with them in a coffee shop and made a pitch, and they were very, very excited. So the three of us then made a master list of faculty we thought could be instrumental in looking at what we could do. And so I had not worked with David yet, and I always wanted to work with David, so I had said, would you be willing to serve on the design team? And he was really excited about this. I don't know if he still are, but
It's getting better all the time. It is.
And we just came up with a list of faculty that we either have worked with or have wanted to work with or had a level of expertise we thought could contribute. And those teams are evolving. We have people rotating off and people coming on, and so it's really quite exciting to see that. In terms of the research, well, first, to get Chell, I actually went through his wife, and I talked to his wife about, you think Chell might be interested? And we were given the charge by our program officer that we really should get someone who either is an engineer or is familiar with engineering as our project manager. And so between his wife Amy and myself, we approached Chell to think about it, and I think it was just a nice transition for you after spending so many years with the first-year engineering program. And he's becoming a resource, an unexpected rich resource for us. We just really love talking and bouncing ideas off of Chell, and he's very even-keeled and very resourceful from that standpoint. In terms of the writing, like many projects, you go through a very strong period of time of developing. So we have spent the first 2 years trying to develop and fine-tune the tasks, which we know are always a work in motion. And so we are just starting dissemination from the standpoint of letting others know about the model, about the partnership, about these essential features, some of the preliminary steps that we're taking. And then I think the next thing would be to start really digging into the data and find out how can we begin to carve out some of these pieces. So I know Todd Kelly wants to look at the student learning aspect. I'd like to look at the teacher aspect. And then this gives Chelsea and Madeline a chance to start develop their research idea should they choose that path. So Chelsea is very interested in looking at the student aspect and how they respond to what are called open response tasks, where they're given questions that are somewhat remotely related to what the children are learning in science. And she wants to know, if I give them this question, I wonder if they could answer it, and if so, how do they answer it? So she's going to get the chance to direct and lead that particular portion. But I would say dissemination is, it wouldn't go, it's not scheduled till year 5 in full mode, so to say, but it's beginning to start, and we're looking at conference papers first. And part of it is just managing and organizing. There's so much data coming in, and training students how to analyze, and then looking at the literature and making sure we're using correct or adequate theoretical frameworks and aligning that with what we're trying to do while remaining true to our original goals. It's a little overwhelming. So I know Jim is looking at taking some type of leadership role with the hub activity, but also a little bit about partnership development from the design team perspective, and our evaluators working on different aspects as well. So it's a slow process.
And going back to you asked about grant writing, the team that Brenda assembled started about a year in advance of the deadline and actually started meeting regularly, writing pieces, massaging it, and then obviously it sort of ramped up as the deadline got closer, but it started that far in advance.
It's nice to have an RFP that's out there that far in advance.
True.
Well, I had made a pitch to the director of the program many, many years ago, and he was very excited about it, so he had his ear on it. And then I looked at the RFP every year to see how it was changing, and then he told me it was not changing until the year that we submitted. And then what I did is I created a one-page summary, and I made a pitch to him. I literally flew to DC to make a pitch, and he said, well, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? So he had it on his radar. But it's not funded through him. It's actually funded through the Division of Undergraduate Engineering, which puts a whole new flavor on your program officer and what he wants, because the program officer now wants to know how is this impacting undergraduate engineering, when it has nothing directly related to undergraduate engineering. Indirectly, it's impacting our faculty, but we are not collecting data on that. So that's why I said our program officer is trying to redirect us. So it's put a wrinkle. So that's why I can't get to that later, because I'm still trying to put out a fire with the federal government right now. So
what are they going to do?
But it was, and Jim made the recommendation, once you have the idea for a grant proposal, you have the seed, you need to meet with everyone every week. So we met, originally I think we met every other Friday, I think it was, or every third Friday.
It wasn't weekly at the beginning.
And it was from 10 o'clock to 11:30, and it was the key players, Todd, Johannes, myself, Jim, and then we invited the DLRC to be co-partners, and they were on board very early on, because I think they were very excited and supportive of what we were doing. But to be very, very honest, the bulk of writing was on my shoulders, and it was a matter of taking pieces from people that could produce some pieces and then weaving it in. And then Sally Bond from the OVPR office assisted me with making sure I was hitting all the right buttons in the RFP, those essential features, and hitting this and hitting that. So Sally and I worked very, very close. And Jim wrote some substantial amounts as well. So the bottom line is, when it comes to grant writing, you have this beautiful team and everyone is actively participating, but when you're writing it, you're probably the only one writing a big, big part of it, and it's a matter of taking pieces and massaging it in. So I think the other thing we grapple with is the level of commitment people are able to make, knowing that everyone is so busy. It's really, really hard to, I'm passionate about it and I would give every hour to it, but I can't expect other people to do that either. So I have to honor what the faculty are able to do, what the teachers are able to do. Now with the new RISE evaluation, we can support those policies as well. So, and it meant getting schools involved. I wrote 35 letters to schools a year, 2 years in advance to tell them I was doing this. So there's a lot of prep work on my part to try to get, it's because I believed in it. If you believe in it, I believe it can come true.
So you're contacting principals?
Superintendents, principals, phone calls, going to the school, having someone say, yes, I'm interested, can you come drive out to Kokomo, make a presentation of what this could look like, what this means. And then going in front of 40 teachers and saying what this could mean for you, and having them fire away at you. So you kind of have to think on your feet really fast. The key thing of working with teachers, and I bet Lou knows this too, I know David knows this, if you're a former practicing teacher or have had a rich experience in a K-12 setting, teachers will respect you and they will listen to you. You have just leveled the playing field. There's no hierarchy anymore. You are with them, and this co-generation is just amazing. So I'm lucky. They respect Chell as an engineer and as somewhat of a manager, but they really respect him when he comes in and he's working with the children, and they really respect what Todd and I try to do because we're former practicing teachers.
And for me, they respect me because I am an English language learner myself, so I know what it's like to learn a language, just to develop. So that's
I think that's people forget that when you're building university-school partnerships. I think that's a key piece. There's always going to be a power differential, and so you try to level that field. Come clean.
Well, let's thank our speakers again.
Hail to hope, Purdue, our friendship, may she never lack.